Back in September 2023, I uploaded a video about my experience playing Parasite Eve for the first time, a survival horror RPG developed by Squaresoft known for its cinematic cutscenes, story, combat system, and of course the debut of Aya Brea. Parasite Eve cemented itself as a definite must-play in the PlayStation 1 library. Now that video was uploaded exactly 25 years when Parasite Eve first released in Japan, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for Parasite Eve 2, except I missed it all the way back in December last year. So what's the next release date for Parasite Eve 2? Well, it's none other than the European release on August 25th, 2000. Interestingly, Parasite Eve was only released in Japan and America. Therefore, Parasite Eve 2 was the first game that introduced Europeans to the series. Both sequels, Parasite Eve 2 and The Third Birthday, have some kind of negative reputation. Out of the two, The Third Birthday is the worst. However, we'll get to that game at another time. Parasite Eve 2, on the other hand, actually had good reviews, but it was the many changes it had that people criticized. Even though Parasite Eve 2 was developed by Squaresoft, majority of the staff who worked on Parasite Eve didn't return to work on the sequel. For example, the director and writer of Parasite Eve was Takashi Takeda, while in Parasite Eve 2 it was Kenichi Iwao. Iwao previously worked in Capcom and wrote the first Resident Evil. He left Capcom soon after completion and joined Squaresoft. At the time, Squaresoft wanted Parasite Eve to have a Resident Evil style follow-up, and with the addition of Iwao, it was the perfect opportunity. As director, Iwao brought on some former Resident Evil staff to work on Parasite Eve 2 as well. Due to the change in style, the biggest and notable change was the gameplay. In Parasite Eve, we were introduced to a battle system using real-time combat alongside the active time bar used in the Final Fantasy series. In Parasite Eve 2, the active time bar and attack range dome was completely removed. Instead, the battle system was fully in real time. Not only that, the movement was changed to tank controls. Personally, I didn't have too much trouble using these controls. You either love it or hate it. You can definitely feel how limited your maneuverability is in combat. If I recall correctly, in Parasite Eve, I moved pretty slowly unless you used haste, so maybe the change in movement wasn't that bad after all. People have said that Parasite Eve 2 is more actiony than RPG, and I agree with that statement. There is RPG elements that have carried over, like gaining experience and bonus points after battle. In the first game, bonus points can be used to increase your ATP gauge, inventory slots, and either your weapon or armor stats. Because of the shift in gameplay, you can't do any of that in Parasite Eve 2. Bonus points was changed to bounty points as a currency used to purchase weapons, armors, items, and ammunition. You don't even level up like you used to do in Parasite Eve. The experience points you gained are used to unlock and level your Parasite Energy, which is the magic system in the game. Parasite Energy takes a new approach in Parasite Eve 2. Unlike the first game, Parasite Energy are split into 4 elements: fire, wind, water, and earth. Each element has 3 abilities, and you can upgrade each ability up to 3 levels. The final ability for each element is locked until you level the other 2 abilities to 3. Also, in combat, when you use one of these abilities, it actually pauses the combat and shows the ability's range of effect, kind of similar when you took an action in the first game. Weapons and armors are vastly different in Parasite Eve 2. They no longer have attributes like critical rate up or adding a frost effect to your bullets, and because of the removal of bonus points, you can allocate points to your equipment stats. Instead, Parasite Eve 2 introduces a variety of ammunition for various weapons, all with different properties. A new addition is that some weapons can attach a secondary weapon. For example, one of the rifles, the M4A1, can use several attachments like the hammer that can stun enemies or the pike that shoots out fire. The inventory system also had a few changes compared to the first game. You can increase your inventory slots since that required bonus points, so you're stuck with the default of 20. In each area of the game, there's usually a storage box that you can offload items. However, your inventory does fill up quickly, especially later in the game when carrying multiple weapons. I think the most notable change of the inventory system is that you can access it during combat. To use any of your weapons, items, or ammunition in combat, you'll have to put them in your armor's attachment slots. You can increase your armor's attachment slot by using an item called Belt Pouch. This item does not increase your inventory slots, and there's a limited amount of them throughout the game, so it's best to use them later when you have endgame armor. There are a lot more changes to go through, but I think that's enough for now. Hopefully you get the idea on how different Parasite Eve 2 is compared to its predecessor. Which brings us to the next important part of this video, the story. For those who don't know, Parasite Eve is a sequel based on a novel of the same title, written by Hideaki Senna. Senna wasn't involved with the story as it was between Squaresoft and his publisher. Parasite Eve did a good job referencing concepts from the novel, like mitochondrial Eve, and introducing new concepts like the neo-mitochondrian creatures, NMCs for short. The question is, how do you continue the story after the events of Parasite Eve? There were 2 endings, one where you completed the game normally, and the other ending was doing a second playthrough of the game called EX Game, and you had to reach the top of the Chrysler building, an optional area only available in that mode. In the EX Game ending, Aya loses her mitochondrial powers as she comes to terms with her sister's death. This ending is likely non-canon as Parasite Eve II uses parasite energy. If that's the case, then the story must continue on from the normal ending, which was a bit open-ended, as it concludes with Aya using her mitochondrial powers to resonate with the audience members at Carnegie Hall. Parasite Eve II takes place 3 years after the events of the first game. The opening cutscene is tense as we see someone shooting at NMC targets. It turns out to be Aya as she recalls the events in Parasite Eve. She quit the force to become an NMC hunter, joining an FBI organization based in Los Angeles called MIST, the Mitochondrian Investigation and Suppressions Team. During those 3 years, Aya hasn't encountered another mutant like Eve, and the numbers of NMCs were dwindling, until one chilly late summer evening. Aya accidentally shoots at a civilian, stopping the target practice, and we're introduced to Pierce Carradine, a co-worker of Aya's who's in charge of the practice range. He jokes to Aya, saying if she's got something against little girls, but she replies that she's not in the zone. Pierce asks if we had enough shooting targets for now, and here is where we familiarize ourselves with the controls. If you continue target practice, you can go through 5 levels of varying difficulty, and depending on the level, if you score high enough, you can get a specific item by talking to Jodie at her shop outside the practice range. I didn't get anything at the end of it, so I guess I was pretty ass at it. Once you're done with the practice range, you'll meet up with Pierce, who relays us a message from the director of MIST, Eric Hal Baldwin. He wants Aya to go down and check out the top of Akropolis Tower due to some recent reports of an NMC sighting. So we make our way out. Already, the situation looks hectic. Multiple emergency services have congregated, and we even see a helicopter crashing into the ground. Aya then arrives to the tower, and as we make our way to the entrance, we get this cool dynamic shot moving around the pre-rendered background. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the only time this shot is used. At the entrance, we see a cop and ask him about the situation. He tells us a SWAT team entered the tower 10 minutes ago, but they lost contact of them. Fortunately, civilians had been evacuated with some yelling something about creatures. He then led us inside as we take the elevator up to the rooftop. Akropolis Tower is one of 4 locations we'll be exploring throughout the game. The other 3 are Dryfield, the Shelter, and Neo-Ark. Later in the game, these 3 locations are connected, leaving Akropolis Tower the only place you can return back to. As the first location of the game, I think Akropolis Tower does a great job setting the tone. Aya enters the rooftop on high alert, checking at angles looking for NMCs. However, it's quiet, too quiet, so we move onwards into the next room. Inside, we see a bloodbath. The SWAT team massacred. A very brutal and gory sight. I think seeing this just moments after starting the game already sets the horror atmosphere to an extreme level. Throughout exploring Akropolis Tower, we're introduced to a new type of NMCs called ANMCs, Artificial Neo-Mitochondrian Creatures. We learn this term in the second half of the game. We're also introduced to 2 characters during our exploration, Rupert Broderick, another hunter from MIST who saves us at one point, and Number 9, who we first see attacking Rupert and then defeating him near the end of Akropolis Tower. Number 9 retreats after the fight with him, and then he detonates some explosives that were set up earlier. Fortunately, a chopper arrives just in time, saving Aya and Rupert before the whole tower explodes. We return back at MIST headquarters in Baldwin's office. He wants Aya to investigate another NMC-related incident at the Mojave Desert. So, we prepare for our trip, and Pierce comes up to us with some news about the metallic implant that we found on a human transforming NMC at the tower. The implant is a microtransmitter, meaning that someone is controlling them. He also found some sand which matches the same with Mojave Desert, linking our 2 investigations. We then head out to Mojave Desert and arrive at the second location of the game, Dryfield. Aya begins her investigation, looking for any locals around. We encounter some new ANMCs, as well as some actual NMCs like bats and scorpions. We're introduced to more characters in Dryfield. The first is Gary Douglas, the only surviving resident who runs an auto shop and scrapyard. We'll be seeing Gary numerous of times. He was the one who called the FBI for help. And even though he was skeptical of Aya, he eventually sells us various weapons, items, and ammunition if we got the BP. And let's not forget about Gary's dog, Flint, a very good boy who helps us in many ways throughout the game, and surprisingly affects some of the rewards and items we get, which I'll talk about later. Just moments after meeting Gary, we meet another individual named Kyle Madigan, a private investigator looking for a shelter nearby. He seems to know that Aya is a hunter from MIST and suggests that we work together since we're looking for the same thing. We split paths to gather more information, where we return back to Gary to ask about the shelter. He confirms there's a shelter out in the hills and was initially made to be a winter shelter until some big company bought it a few years back. During our conversation, Aya hears someone scream nearby. It apparently came from an empty house. However, Gary blocked the area to keep people out, so we have to go this roundabout way. At this point, you'll start to notice one of the worst parts of this game, the backtracking. To get to the empty house, we have to go down a well, beat a boss, up a ladder to the general store, exit the store, enter the house adjacent to the empty house because it's locked, and then notice that we're blocked by a closet that's bolted to the sides. So we have to go back to Gary, not taking the same path because the store leads to the starting area, and then ask Gary if he's got any tools, and it tells us to borrow one from his garage, where we obtain a monkey wrench. And then we return back to the closet, unbolted, and finally enter the empty house. Even though we went back a different way, it's still tiresome, especially going through so many areas, and this happens multiple times. Anyways, entering the empty house, we find the person who was screaming, but she immediately dies and we're met again by number 9, who we still don't know their name at this point. He throws a few hints, like saying our mitochondria will have the last laugh, and after defeating him in another fight, he figures something out saying "you're Eve's," but doesn't finish the sentence. He then laughs, and a surreal scene happens as Aya has a mental breakdown, telepathically setting number 9 on fire before collapsing. Aya then dreams of a young girl who looks similar to her. She seems to have telepathic powers and manages to get out wherever she is. The dream ends and it's now nighttime at Dryfield. Kyle shows up at the empty house and spots Aya. He then proceeds to point his gun at Aya for some reason. She wakes up and instinctively set Kyle's hand on fire. Kyle clears up the misunderstanding as he was just looking for us and was told by Gary that we would be here. He then asks what happened, to which Aya notices that number 9 has disappeared, and Kyle claims that he didn't see him as well. Gary also told Kyle about the shelter and believes that's where the creatures are coming from. Of course, we need a car to get there, so Kyle joins alongside us back to our car. Unfortunately, our car gets destroyed by a group of ANMCs called scavengers. After taking them down, we go back to Gary and ask him if we could borrow his car. There's a truck but is leaking oil, so while he fixes on that, he wants us to find a gasoline can. Looking for the gasoline can already takes a bit of exploration. If you return to Gary with the empty can, he'll say he needs some gasoline, requiring more backtracking. Once that's done, it'll take a little more time for the car to be ready, so Gary tells us to go back to our motel room and wait for his call. We take a quick nap in our motel room and dream again the young girl, this time getting cornered by a bunch of number 9s in some facility. A cutscene then follows after with Aya waking up and decides to take a shower. I assure you, dear viewer, this scene was necessary for the plot. Some say this scene is iconic and I can see why. Clearly, they wanted to showcase their water physics. During this scene, we hear Flynn barking nearby, and once Aya finishes her shower, she feels heavy vibrations coming in the distance. Here we encounter a gargantuan ANMC called Burner. This boss fight is interesting because Flynn can die if you don't deal a certain amount of damage within 3 minutes. You won't get any XP or BP and the burner runs away. If you manage to deal enough damage, whether it's spamming necrosis or cheesing the boss, Gary will give you a special pistol called the M950. Near the end of the game, Flynn surviving will unlock some weapons, so it's worth saving him. Overcoming the burner, we can go to the next location, the shelter. We meet up with Kyle at the truck, who seems oblivious to what just happened. Apparently, he stepped out of town moments before, but surely he must have felt or heard the burner coming. Regardless, he has more information about the shelter. To sum it up, the organization that boarded are creating an airborne virus that can trigger neo-mitochondria, which explains people transforming into NMCs. However, it raises more questions like where the neo-mitochondria are coming from in the first place. After the conversation, we head out to the shelter. Here we have to swap to disc 2 to begin the second half of the game. We're hunted by these ANMCs called Chasers, and Kyle gets injured by one of them. Aya tells him to go inside the mine while she fends them off. After defeating them, we head inside to find Kyle. He's nowhere to be found, and exploring the end of the mines, we encounter a boss fight with the Blizzard Chaser, a leader of the Chaser Pack. As we finish the fight, Aya assumes that Kyle is dead since there's nowhere to go from here, even though there's no body. She then notices a motorcycle that seems to belong to number 9, and there's some light coming through a crack in the wall. It's actually a gate to a secret path that we unlock, leading us down to the shelter. The shelter is where ANMCs are created. You'll also notice this is the place where we see the young girl in our dreams. During a certain point, we get another dream, but it's more like a post-cognition since we're awake this time. We see the young girl in the same area that we're in. It seems like she's running away from someone, most likely number 9, as she's forced to enter a room nearby. There, she sees whatever this thing is. She then screams, and that concludes the post-cognition. Continuing on our exploration, we eventually get locked in the sterilization room and have to escape through a dust chute leading us to the dumping heap. There, we face another boss named Glutton. We end the fight by luring it in a trap. This inadvertently activates the countdown to the incinerator, which is the area we're currently in. The exit is locked, and after interacting with it 3 times, we get rescued by none other than Kyle, who explains that he somehow managed to survive after falling down a crevice in the mines. We team up once again and explore the lower floors of the shelter. This is a perfect time to talk about the endings in Parasite Eve 2. There are 3 endings, the bad end, the normal end, and the good end. I looked up the requirements needed for the good end because I know I'm not returning back to this game anytime soon. Firstly, we have to complete a puzzle which, when solved, unlocks a gate that leads back to Dryfield. Going back to Dryfield, Cal decides he wants to explore the shelter more, so we go on our separate ways. We can now visit Gary for some new supplies and pick up any leftover items in our storage. However, the main reason why we're in Dryfield in the first place is that Pierce is somewhere in the area, specifically at the water tank. If Flint's still alive, he'll lead you there, and at the top, you'll find a slump Pierce with ANMCs flying about. Saving him is one of the requirements to get the good end, and you're probably thinking that this appearance is a bit random. Well, there's a phone conversation with Jody just after getting our car destroyed in Dryfield. Jody mentions that they were worried about Aya, especially Pierce, because it was a while since we last contacted them. She even says where he'd go, indicating that Pierce went out to Dryfield to find Aya. Anyway, since we saved Pierce, we go back to the shelter and continue our exploration. We find ourselves at a laboratory where we have to access a computer to gain some information. After completing a puzzle and a quiz, we get to learn about the second Neoteny plan, a project to create artificial neo-mitochondrian creatures to revitalize the human race and become the apex species. Also, there's a big reveal as we find out that the neo-mitochondria used to create the ANMCs was a sample from Aya herself. Soon after, a phone nearby rings. We pick it up and it's Pierce telling us he's in the shelter and to meet him up at the pod service gantry. This was where we saw the young girl entered in our post-cognition. Also, if you didn't save Pierce, Cal will be the one to call you. In the pod service gantry, we see that weird thing that the young girl saw, and once we get to Pierce, we discover a few things. The first is the last location of the game, Neo-Ark. Apparently, there's something inside there generating a lot of power, enough to create an electromagnetic barrier, and enough power to power that weird thing we just saw, which Pierce points out is a cocoon-like ANMC. Our goal now is to stop whatever is generating the power in Neo-Ark in order to stun its growth. We gain access to an elevator and proceed to go down to Neo-Ark, but before we get there, there's this scene with the President of the United States. A staff member is reporting to him about a mole they've sent to an organization, and that mole has found their target. The staff member suggests going with a different plan as destroying said target might be difficult, and so the President gives his permission to undergo the plan. The cutscene then follows as we see a satellite get activated. Back to Aya, we enter Neo-Ark. You'll meet Kyle here if you didn't save Pierce. Neo-Ark is split into various environments, each suited to specific ANMCs. After we shut down both power generators, Aya can sense the barrier go down. However, she still feels something emanating deeper in the shelter. Returning to the upper floors of the shelter, we get a cutscene of Number 9 in a freezer room awakening a bunch of ANMCs called Golem. Number 9 is also a Golem, but unlike the others, he's a special case as he retained his memories and intellect as a human. We then gain access to another elevator taking us 6 floors down. Exiting the elevator, we get into a fight against an ANMC, and at the end of the corridor there's someone else. Obviously it's the young girl from our post-cognition, but she's wearing a helmet of some sort. As we defeat the ANMC, she retreats into the next room, and in that room we face a big boss variant called the Puppet Stinger. We made quick work of it, burning it to death. Kyle shows up saying we found our mark and that the young girl is the one controlling the ANMCs. Aya thinks so too, and so Kyle proceeds with his plan to kill the young girl. Of course, Aya stops him, handling the situation herself as she takes off the helmet. The young girl is named Eve. Aya found that on her helmet. Aya then recognizes the helmet as a brainwave amplifier. Basically, Eve was raised and brainwashed in order to control ANMCs. Suddenly, the phone rings, which frightens Eve. On the other line is Pierce, who says he's got some big news for us and wants us back ASAP. However, the line gets cut off. We then have to talk to Kyle, initiating the next scene where the power goes out and gas starts to fill the room. Kyle shoots out the window, creating our escape, and we start to see golems entering the room. Kyle decides to stay behind, already suited to fend off the golems. We're against the clock in this room as the gas will seep over. We have to get Eve over at an elevator across the room before the gas kills her. At the beginning, she's looking at something and you have to look at what's inside. It's an Eve clone, and then we have to talk to Eve, convincing her to come with us. You can't go too far or else Eve won't follow you, so you gotta find the right distance for her to move. In my playthrough, she barely made it to the elevator with only 19 HP. Taking the elevator up brings us back to Neo-Ark. Eve gets overwhelmed with her surroundings and runs off. We chase after her and meet up with Number 9 who has captured Eve. He threatens to kill Eve if we do any funny stuff and tells someone on his radio to have a chopper on standby. This is also where he reveals his name as Number 9 so late into the game. I then ask what he's planning to do with Eve. All we get is that Eve is important to his plan, and I guess we let him get away as it's not worth the risk saving her. We're nearing the end of the game at this point. We'll be seeing the last variant of enemies, the golems, roaming about throughout Neo-Ark in the shelter. We'll go back to the pod service gantry to check up on Pierce since we got our call cut off and he's nowhere to be found. There is a Tom memo from him. Whilst we were going through Neo-Ark, Pierce did some digging around and found out someone was leaking MIST data to the people in the shelter. It's implied here that it was our boss, the director of MIST, Eric Baldwin, who leaked the data and most likely our neo-mitochondria sample. After reading the memo, you must make a call to Jodie and let her know about it before we exit out the shelter, as this is another requirement for the good end. Our next order of business is intercepting number 9 from escaping with Eve since he called for a chopper. We go through the parking garage and we find number 9's motorcycle. There's a teddy bear on the motorcycle that belongs to Eve that you can obtain, which is important if Flynn is still alive. We then get out from the shelter to the helipod and we see a bunch of golems, I assume waiting for number 9. One of them tries to attack us, but we're saved by the military. After that, we get another scene at the Oval Office. Apparently, it's looking dire on their end. They're aware that the barrier has been taken down, however a new barrier has appeared and potentially around their objective, the cocoon-like ANMC. Their mall hasn't responded and their options are getting limited, so the president is given the heavy decision to orbital strike the target. We return back to Aya, who's talking to a second lieutenant about NMCs and mist. We're told that the military are now investigating the shelter, and soon after, a sergeant reports to the lieutenant. Looks like they couldn't find Eve on number 9, however there is one obstruction they couldn't get into. We get the go-ahead to return back to the shelter and we exit out of the tent. Outside, we meet Flynn and Jodie. Jodie tells us they've called Baldwin, and it wasn't just him leaking data, many other mist agents from different areas were too. Fortunately, Rupert is on the case. Jodie wonders where Pierce is, and this is another requirement for the good end. At the military camp, we get access to all the storages throughout the game except for the ones in the shelter. We can also buy some new supplies that depends on whether you called Jodie or not. If you didn't, Rupert will be at the camp instead. We could give the teddy bear to Flynn to find Eve, but we can actually use Flynn to help an injured soldier return back to camp. Doing so brings the shop and storage from the camp over to the parking garage, and we unlock 2 new weapons, an LMG called the M249 and a grenade launcher called the MM1. Also, don't forget about Pierce, who's in the golem freezer room. I think he got chased out by some golems and ended up here freezing to death. Aya tells him everything we know and Pierce tells us to leave the cleanup to him while we save Eve. Finally, we head over to the pod service gantry. We see number 9, Eve who has her helmet back on, and Kyle. Since we stopped number 9 from escaping and he's apparently on his last legs because he's an experimental AMNC, he decides to use Eve enacting the shelter's plan and hasten the awakening of the cocoon AMC. Kyle is on number 9's side, betraying us. He goes on a spiel about the organization and its purpose. Number 9 then orders Kyle to shoot us, which he does. Finally he gets to shoot someone, but soon after he shoots number 9, revealing that he's a double agent and obviously the mole sent by the government. Kyle saves Eve and number 9 is enraged. He tries to attack us but gets devoured by the cocoon AMC. Kyle apologizes and explains himself that he had to play both sides. Aya understands and knew it was a diversion. He then reports back to the government and Eve starts to speak, asking if those are stars in the sky. The two look up and we see in the cutscene that the satellite has fired its orbital strike. The cocoon is destroyed, but we see something emerging out, crying like a baby. Aya comes to her senses as she witnessed the damage that has been done. She calls out to Eve and Kyle, and on the other side, Kyle responds. He tells us to save Eve as she has fallen down the hole below along with the creature. Kyle can't do much on the other side and assures Aya that he's okay. We head down and it turns out Kyle's leg got blown off, so he actually can't do anything. We enter the floor below and see Eve suspended above. Emerging in the middle of the room is the ultimate AMC, Brahman. What's tough about this boss fight is that Brahman has a lot of parts to damage, requiring a lot of resources. On top of that, Brahman has some devastating moves. For example, when you damage enough parts, it will reveal its core, like a chargeable beam of light dealing around 120 HP. You can live through this attack in various ways. I equipped the EOD suit, allowing me to tank a hit to 1 HP. Eventually we defeat Brahman as it melts to its demise. We then activate a bridge across to get closer to Eve, but suddenly Brahman grabs Eve into his remains, consuming her. Emerging out of the remains is the final boss of the game, Neo-Mitochondrial Eve. Eve's starting health depends on how many parts you destroyed in the previous fight. She can inflict multiple status elements like poison, darkness, and silence. You can cure these with a stim or penicillin. Even though I had penicillin in my inventory, I didn't bring it into the fight because I thought the status elements wasn't that bad, but it was. Eve can also use combustion, an attack that we can do. You can dodge it and it takes a lot of HP and MP out of you. At least I had some ringer solution to heal both back to full. I used energy shot in this fight to increase our damage output. I also used the MM1 only because I ran out of bullets on the M249 dealing with Brahman. With only 1 shot remaining, I managed to end the battle. The screen goes to white, transitioning us back to the bridge, where Eve grabs us, tries to fly up to the surface as a last-ditch effort, but to no avail, as she disintegrates and we see Aya fall back down. Eve has been eradicated. We hear someone call our name. Aya recognizes the voice, opening her eyes. It's Kyle. Aya's surprised that he's alive. I'm more surprised that he managed to get down here with 1 leg. Aya asks where's Eve, and Kyle replies that she's right here next to us. Kyle says he has a lot more to talk about, but for now he let us rest. Eventually, the military finds us and sends in the medics. We return to the Oval Office one last time. The president gives his praise to Aya and her friends. His staff tells him that they've managed to cover up the truth about this incident by spreading some misinformation. They also found a way to cover up the orbital strike using doctored CG images that'll convince other countries. There's one more thing that the staff has to report, and it's about the agent they've sent, referring to Kyle Madigan. Kyle says he's going to resign and hasn't been seen since. The president, alarmed, wants Kyle to be found and brought in, preventing anything coming to light. This is the outcome of the good end. In the neutral end, it's more of the opposite. Multiple casualties around Dryfield instead of minimal, reporters managing to get footage of ANMCs, and the government unable to convince the public with their misinformation. In the bad end, you don't even see this scene. Finally, we arrive at the epilogue. It's been a year since the events in Parasite Eve II, and Aya updates us on what happened after and how everyone's doing. The FBI moved into action, arresting some of Mist's agents and their own who was associated with the organization running the shelter. Information regarding the organization has been classified, and the case about neo-mitochondria was closed and forgotten. However, Aya and her friends didn't want to sit by and twiddle their thumbs. Rupert took over senior posts, and working alongside with Jodie, they're planning on a full public disclosure about Mist and NMCs. Dr. Maeda, who has been referenced throughout the game, it wasn't a good time to mention him until now, has proposed a superhuman theory. By identifying neo-mitochondria and DNA, he has calculated latent carriers over a 10-year span. He believes these carriers would lead human evolution, but this theory is not widely accepted. However, this did intrigue Pierce, who now is working with Dr. Maeda to find carriers all over the world using the internet. Their plans are going well, with the goal being to merely strengthen the host instead of the neo-mitochondria taking complete control over. As for Eve, Rupert pulled a few things at the FBI, and now she's Aya's younger sister. She's full of life, unlike her past, and she's pretty popular at school. She's also lost her neo-mitochondrial powers. I've seen this story before. Mr. Douglas got seriously injured due to the explosion, but now he's fully recovered as he rebuilds Dryfield. Aya then says that everyone's dealt with what happened in their own way, starting new lives. Except for one, Kyle, who has not been seen since that day. Aya's been searching but to no luck. She'll continue her search though, as she was told by Kyle to never give up. Aya proceeds to mention that she's going on her first vacation in a long while. Pierce gave her tickets to a nature museum. Eve's a curious one, and she'll be asking a lot of questions, so Aya's gotta brush up on her knowledge until then. We move on to the final cutscene of the game, only available in the good end. We see Aya and Eve check out the exhibits, and then we hear someone enter the museum. The two turn around, and at the entrance, it can't be. With a new leg, Aya recognizes it's Kyle and looks on relieved. The screen fades to black and the credits roll up. And that's the end of Parasite Eve II. Every time you complete a playthrough, you get a ranking based on all the experience points you've accumulated. Each rank gives you rewards that you can use in your next playthrough. For example, I earned a D rank rewarding me with Rupert's weapon, the Mongoose, as well as 44 Magnum bullets and a Skull Crystal. There are 14 ranks to get, with the highest being S rank requiring 400,001 XP, and the lowest being L rank requiring you to earn less than 14,501 XP, a challenge in itself. There's also an X rank requiring you to earn all ranks, meaning you have to replay the game 13 times. Unlike Parasite Eve with only EX game, Parasite Eve II has a ton of replayability. When you continue from your complete save file, you'll now get the option to choose a difficulty mode. After completing your first playthrough, you'll unlock replay and bounty mode. Each mode showcases a variety of data, such as the difficulty level of enemies, the level of supplies, your starting HP and MP, and more. There are two other difficulty modes, Scavenger and Nightmare. To unlock Scavenger mode, you need to earn over 69,000 XP, which is equivalent to a D rank, and to unlock Nightmare mode, you need to beat Scavenger mode. The last three modes all have a final score bonus, with the highest being times 10 in Nightmare mode. This allows you to skip through the ranks and score high enough to earn the top ranks. Getting an S rank rewards you with the Gunblade, a weapon number 9 used, and of course a reference to Squall's revolver gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII. After playing through Parasite Eve II for the first time, I think it's a decent game overall. It has its faults like the backtracking, and the music wasn't as memorable as the first. I also think that after Akropolis Tower, things kinda went downhill in a way. In Parasite Eve, we went through different parts of New York City and it felt varied, whereas in Parasite Eve II it felt bland, specifically in Dryfield and the Shelter. Neo-Ark and Akropolis Tower were great, but it's a shame since they were smaller and shorter compared to the two other locations. I found an interview with Iwao who provided insight about the development. Parasite Eve II was initially a spin-off with Kyle Madigan as the protagonist, so that's why the combat system changed. During this stage, Iwao was told by higher-ups to not connect the spin-off with the novel, as well as to not heavily emphasize connection with the first game, which was why we didn't see many characters return. At one point, the higher-ups really liked the prototype version of the game and decided to scrap the spin-off to make an official sequel, with Aya returning back as the protagonist. Since it was initially a spin-off, there wasn't much budget or schedule to begin with, and despite the change, everything remained the same. Iwao claims that the company's financial performance worsened halfway through development, leading to his team being cut in half. Not only that, since there were delays in Squaresoft's other main titles, Parasite Eve II had been pushed forward by 6 months. At the end of the day, Iwao and his team did their best with what they got, and in my opinion, it explains this game perfectly. Very questionable changes by Squaresoft. They should have either committed to the spin-off or made the sequel, keeping everything that made Parasite Eve such a classic. Parasite Eve II does beat its predecessor in other ways, like the cutscenes and the change in Parasite energy allowing customization, but the first game definitely triumphs the sequel, which leaves us to the last game of the trilogy, the third birthday. It can't be that bad, right guys? Right? And that's it for this video. Sorry it felt a bit subpar compared to the Parasite Eve retrospective. I went through many revisions around this because I didn't want the video to be too long, but that's what you get when you go through the whole game. Gonna have to go back to the drawing board when playing these videos. As for what's next on this channel, Resident Evil Requiem is coming out February next year, and I want to do a video about Resident Evil Outbreak. I also gotta do Last Window: The Secret of Cape West. I might have to put that on the back burner when I get better at planning videos. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to check out the channel, like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you next time and catch you guys later. Take care.